Welcome to the world of science fiction where extraordinary tales come to life. Enjoy the journey. The twin moons hung low over the violet horizon as Lyra crouched in silence, her bowstring taut against her fingers. The dense alien forest around her pulsed with bioluminescent life. Glowing vines twisted around ancient trees, and tiny insect-like creatures flitted through the air like living stars. She exhaled slowly, steadying her aim at the shadowy figure moving through the underbrush. This was no ordinary hunt. It was the rite of ascension, a sacred ceremony marking her transition from apprentice to full-fledged member of the Zethar tribe. Her people were wanderers of the stars, bound by ancient traditions that had persisted even after they fled their dying homeworld centuries ago. Tonight, she was tasked with taking down a rare beast known as a luminar stag, a creature prized not just for its shimmering pelt, but for its symbolic significance in Zethar lore. Lyra had tracked this particular stag for hours across treacherous terrain. Her muscles burned from climbing jagged cliffs and wading through phosphorescent swamps. But now she had it in her sights, a majestic creature with antlers that seemed to glow like molten silver. She released the arrow. It whistled through the air like a comet, cutting through the stillness of the forest. But just as it was about to strike its target, something impossible happened. A hand shot out from the shadows and caught the arrow mid-flight. Lyra froze, her heart pounding in disbelief. No one, not even the most skilled warriors of her tribe, could perform such a feat. She stepped forward cautiously, her bow still raised, as the figure emerged from the darkness. He was tall and lean, clad in tattered armor that bore scorch marks and strange insignias she didn't recognize. His face was partially obscured by a helmet with a cracked visor, but his piercing green eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to mask her fear with authority. The man lowered his arm slowly, examining the arrow as if it were some curious artifact. "I could ask you the same," he replied in a voice that was deep but weary. "But I suppose introductions are in order. My name is Cal." Lyra tightened her grip on her bow. "You're trespassing on sacred hunting grounds." Cale raised an eyebrow behind his visor. "Sacred? I didn't see any signs." "This entire planet is sacred," she snapped. "And you've just interfered with my rite of ascension." Cale sighed and tossed the arrow back to her with casual precision. "Look, I didn't mean to interfere. I've been stranded here for weeks trying to avoid detection by, well, let's just say some very unfriendly people." Lyra caught the arrow instinctively, but didn't lower her weapon. Her mind raced as she tried to process what had just happened. According to Zethar tradition, anyone who intercepted an arrow during a ceremonial hunt was bound by fate to marry the hunter who fired it, a custom meant to symbolize unity between two souls destined to protect each other. But this man wasn't Zethar. He wasn't even supposed to be here. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she asked, her voice trembling with frustration. Cale tilted his head quizzically. "Saved your prey." "No," she said through gritted teeth. "You've invoked an ancient bond, one that cannot be broken without dishonoring my entire tribe." Cale blinked at her in confusion before realization dawned on his face. "Wait, are you saying—" "Yes," she interrupted sharply. "By catching that arrow, you've essentially proposed marriage." For a moment, there was silence between them except for the distant hum of nocturnal creatures stirring in the forest. "Well," Cale said finally with a faint smirk, "this is awkward." Lyra glared at him. "This isn't funny. Do you have any idea what this means? If we don't go through with it—" "Relax," he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "I'm not looking to cause trouble for your people, or myself." Before Lyra could respond, there was a sudden rustling in the bushes nearby, followed by an eerie growl that sent shivers down her spine. The luminar stag bolted into view, but it wasn't alone. A massive predator emerged from the shadows, a hulking beast with obsidian scales and glowing red eyes that seemed to burn like embers in its skull-like face. It let out a deafening roar that echoed through the forest as it lunged toward them. Without thinking, Lyra knocked another arrow and fired at its exposed flank, while Kale drew a sleek energy blade from his belt, a weapon unlike anything she'd ever seen before, and charged forward with surprising agility despite his battered armor. Together, they fought side by side against the monstrous creature, their movements instinctively synchronized despite having just met moments ago. When it was over, the beast lying lifeless at their feet, Lyra found herself staring at Kale in stunned silence once again. "Looks like we make a good team," he said with another faint smirk as he wiped blood off his blade. Lyra didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked down at her broken bowstring, the symbol of her failed hunt, and then back up at Kale, who stood there looking both out of place, yet strangely familiar all at once. Kale leaned against the trunk of a massive, glowing tree, his breathing heavy but controlled. The obsidian-scaled predator lay motionless at his feet, its crimson eyes now dim and lifeless. He wiped the sweat from his brow and glanced over at Lyra, who was inspecting her broken bowstring, with a mixture of frustration and resignation. "Well," he said, breaking the silence, "I'd say that went better than expected." Lyra shot him a glare that could have cut through steel. "Better? My bow is ruined, my right of ascension is in shambles, and now I'm bound to some outsider because of a stupid tradition." Kale raised his hands defensively. I didn't ask to be part of your ritual or your traditions, for that matter. I was just trying to survive." Lyra huffed and turned away, her mind racing. She had spent years preparing for this moment, training tirelessly to prove herself worthy in the eyes of her tribe. And now it was all undone because of this stranger, this Cal, who had appeared out of nowhere and disrupted everything. Kale watched her for a moment before speaking again. "Look, I get it. You're angry, but maybe we can figure out a way to, I don't know, undo this bond, or whatever it is." Lyra shook her head. "It's not that simple. The bond isn't just some arbitrary rule. It's sacred. If we break it, the entire tribe will see it as a sign of dishonor." Kale frowned. "And what happens if we go through with it?" Lyra hesitated before answering. "Then you'll be expected to stay with the tribe, to become one of us." Kale let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, I don't see that happening. No offense, but I've got my own problems to deal with." Lyra turned back to him, her curiosity piqued despite herself. "What kind of problems?" Kale hesitated, his expression darkening. For a moment, he seemed lost in thought, as if weighing whether or not to share his story. Finally, he spoke. "I was a soldier, part of an elite unit tasked with maintaining order in the outer colonies. We were sent to suppress a rebellion on a mining world called Velos 7, but things didn't go as planned." He paused, his jaw tightening as he stared into the distance. The rebels weren't just fighting for independence. They had help from an alien faction we didn't even know existed. They ambushed us during a routine patrol and wiped out most of my squad in minutes. I barely made it out alive. Lyra listened in silence, her anger slowly giving way to sympathy. "I managed to steal one of their ships and escape," Kale continued. "But they've been hunting me ever since. I ended up crash landing here while trying to evade their patrols." He looked at her then, his green eyes filled with a weariness that spoke of countless battles fought and lost. "So yeah," he said with a bitter smile, "marriage isn't exactly high on my list of priorities right now." Lyra crossed her arms and studied him carefully. Despite his gruff demeanor and obvious reluctance to embrace her tribe's customs, there was something about him that intrigued her, something she couldn't quite put into words. "Your enemies," she said slowly. "Do they know you're here?" Kale shook his head. "Not yet, but it's only a matter of time before they find me." Lyra frowned. If what he said was true, then his presence could put the entire tribe in danger, a risk she couldn't afford to take lightly. "We need to speak with Elder Tuvin," she said finally. Kale raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "The leader of my tribe," Lyra explained. "He'll know what to do." Kale sighed but nodded reluctantly. "Fine. Lead the way." The journey back to the Zephyr encampment was tense and uneventful. Lyra walked ahead in silence, her thoughts racing as she tried to make sense of everything that had happened. Cale followed close behind, his eyes scanning their surroundings for any signs of danger. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, a sensation that had kept him alive through countless missions but offered little comfort now. When they finally reached the encampment, a sprawling network of tents and structures built into the natural contours of the forest, Cale couldn't help but marvel at its beauty. The Zephyr people had managed to create a harmonious blend of technology and nature, with glowing vines serving as both decoration and power sources for their devices. As they entered the central clearing where the tribal council convened, all eyes turned toward them. Lyra called out an elderly man with a long silver beard and piercing blue eyes. He rose from his seat at the head of the council circle and approached them with measured steps. "Elder Tuvin," Lyra said respectfully, bowing her head slightly. The elder's gaze shifted to Cale, his expression unreadable. "And who is this?" Tuvin asked. "This is Cale," Lyra replied hesitantly. "He caught my arrow during the rite." A murmur rippled through the gathered tribespeople as they exchanged shocked glances. Tuvin raised a hand for silence before addressing Cale directly. "Is this true?" he asked. Cale nodded curtly. "It wasn't intentional. I just reacted on instinct." Tuvin studied him for a long moment before turning back to Lyra. "You understand what this means?" he asked gravely. Lyra nodded reluctantly. "Then we must convene the council immediately," Tuvin declared. As night fell over the encampment, Cale found himself seated in the center of the council circle alongside Lyra, while Elder Tuvin and several other tribal leaders debated their fate. Some argued that tradition must be upheld no matter what, that Cale should be welcomed into the tribe as Lyra's bonded partner despite his outsider status. Others voiced concerns about potential threats posed by Cale's enemies, fearing that allowing him to stay could bring ruin upon them all. Through it all, Cale remained silent, his mind racing as he tried to come up with an alternative solution that wouldn't involve marrying someone he'd just met or endangering an entire community because of his past mistakes. Finally, Tuvin stood up and raised his hands for silence once more. "We will take time to deliberate further," he announced solemnly. "In the meantime, Cale will remain under close watch within our encampment until we reach a decision." Lyra opened her mouth as if to protest, but closed it again when she saw Tuvin's stern expression. Cale simply nodded without argument, knowing full well that any resistance would only make things worse for both himself and Lyra. The Zephyr encampment was unusually quiet as the tribal council gathered once again under the twin moons. The air was thick with tension, and the soft hum of bioluminescent plants cast an eerie glow over the central clearing. Lyra stood to one side, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, while Cale sat nearby, his posture rigid but his expression unreadable. Elder Tuvin, seated in the center of the council circle, glanced around at the assembled leaders. His weathered face betrayed no emotion, but his piercing blue eyes seemed to take in every detail. "We have heard much debate over the past day," Tuvin began, his voice steady but grave. "And now it is time to decide." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. She had spent the entire night replaying the events of her failed hunt in her mind, trying to come to terms with what had happened. She had always respected the traditions of her people, but this situation felt different, unfair, even. How could she be expected to bond with a man she barely knew? And yet, how could she defy the sacred customs that had guided her tribe for generations? Cale, on the other hand, seemed oddly calm. He had spent most of his time observing the tribe from a distance, taking note of their technology and customs, while keeping his own thoughts carefully guarded. But as he sat there now, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. These people were unlike any he had encountered before, proud, resourceful, and deeply connected to their traditions. And yet he couldn't shake the feeling that his presence here was a ticking time bomb. Tuvin raised a hand for silence as one of the council members, A stern-faced woman named Yelena stood to speak. "Elder Tuvan," Yelena began, her voice firm and clear. "While I respect our traditions as much as anyone here, I cannot ignore the potential danger this outsider brings to our tribe. His enemies are powerful and relentless. If they find him here, they will not hesitate to destroy us all." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Another council member, a younger man named Jarek, rose to counter her argument. "With all due respect, Yelena," Jarek said, "our traditions are what define us as a people. If we abandon them now out of fear, what does that say about us? The bond between Lyra and Kale was forged by fate. Who are we to question it?" The debate continued for what felt like hours, with voices rising and falling like waves against a rocky shore. Lyra listened in silence, her emotions swirling like a storm inside her. She glanced at Kull, who met her gaze briefly before looking away. Finally, Tovan raised his hand once more, and the clearing fell silent. "We have heard both sides," Tovan said solemnly. "And now we must decide." He turned to Lyra first. "Lyra," he said gently but firmly, "you are at the center of this matter. What do you believe should be done?" Lyra hesitated, feeling the weight of every eye on her. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. "I believe," she began slowly, choosing her words carefully. "I believe that Kel's presence here is dangerous, but not because of who he is or what he has done. It is dangerous because it challenges us to question our traditions." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "But perhaps that is not a bad thing," she added quietly. "Perhaps it is time for us to ask ourselves whether our customs should define us, or whether we should define them." Her words hung in the air like an arrow poised mid-flight. Tovan nodded thoughtfully before turning to Kale. "And you?" he asked. "What do you have to say for yourself?" Kale stood slowly, his green eyes scanning the crowd before settling on Tovan. "I didn't ask for any of this," he said bluntly. "I didn't come here looking for trouble or for a wife." He glanced briefly at Lyra before continuing. "But I also know that running away won't solve anything. If staying here means protecting your people from whatever's coming after me, then I'll do it." His words were met with stunned silence. Tovan studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "Very well," he said finally. "The council will deliberate one final time before reaching its verdict." As night gave way to dawn, Lyra found herself sitting alone at the edge of the encampment, staring out at the alien forest beyond. The events of the past day felt like a blur, a whirlwind of emotions and decisions that had left her feeling drained and uncertain. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Kale approaching cautiously. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Lyra shrugged but didn't object as he sat down beside her. For a while they sat in silence, watching as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees. "You spoke well back there," Kale said finally. Lyra glanced at him in surprise. "You think so?" Kale nodded. "You're willing to question things most people wouldn't dare to question, even when it's not easy." Lyra sighed and looked down at her hands. "I don't know if that makes me brave or foolish." "Maybe both," Kale said with a faint smile. They lapsed into silence again before Lyra spoke up hesitantly. "Do you really think your enemies will find you here?" she asked. Cal's expression darkened slightly as he considered his answer. "I don't know," he admitted truthfully. "But if they do, I'll do whatever it takes to keep them away from your people." Lyra studied him carefully, the lines etched into his face by years of hardship and loss, the way his eyes seemed both wary and determined at once, and felt something shift inside her. Perhaps fate wasn't just about following tradition blindly. Perhaps it was about finding strength in unexpected places and forging bonds that could withstand even the greatest challenges. Renar, the leader of the Kera, a neighboring tribe known for their aggressive expansion and mastery of advanced weaponry, stood at the crest of a ridge overlooking the Zethar encampment. His dark eyes narrowed as he observed the activity below, a predatory smirk playing on his lips. He had been watching the Zethar for weeks, ever since rumors of a strange outsider among them had reached his ears. Reinar had initially dismissed the rumors as nonsense, but his spies had confirmed the truth. A battle-scarred soldier from some unknown faction had taken refuge with the Zethar. To Reinar, this was an opportunity. The Zethar were a peaceful people, skilled in the ways of nature, but woefully unprepared for true conflict. If he could exploit their weakness and seize their territory, he would gain access to valuable resources and expand his tribe's influence throughout the region. But there was another reason Reinar wanted to take control of the Zethar. Lyra. He had admired her strength and skill since childhood, and he had always believed that she would one day become his mate. But now, this outsider threatened to steal her away. A challenge Reinar could not tolerate. "Prepare the attack," Reinar said to his lieutenant, a hulking warrior named Vorik. "We strike at dawn." Back in the Zethar encampment, the tribal council had finally reached its verdict. Elder Tovin summoned Lyra and Kale to the central clearing, his expression grave. "We have considered all aspects of this matter," Tovin announced, his voice echoing through the clearing. "And we have reached a decision." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for the verdict. Would they uphold tradition and force her to marry Kal? Or would they break the bond and risk dishonoring their ancestors? "We have decided," Tovin continued, "that Kale will be allowed to stay with the Zethar, but only under certain conditions." Kale raised an eyebrow, his green eyes fixed on Tovin. "First," Tovin said, "he must prove his worth to our tribe by undergoing a series of trials designed to test his strength, skill, and loyalty." Kale nodded slowly. "I understand." "Second," Tovin added, "he must abide by our customs and respect our traditions, even if he does not fully understand them." Kale hesitated before answering. "I can do that." "And finally," Tovin said, his gaze shifting to Lyra, "the bond between you and Kale will remain unbroken, but it will not be consummated until you both choose to do so willingly." Lyra let out a sigh of relief. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was better than she had expected. But before anyone could celebrate, a warning horn sounded from the edge of the encampment, cutting through the silence like a knife. "The Kara," someone shouted. "They're attacking." Panic erupted as the Zethar scrambled to defend their home. Lyra grabbed her bow and arrows, her heart pounding in her chest. "What's happening?" Kale asked, his hand instinctively reaching for his energy blade. "The Kara are our rivals," Lyra explained grimly. "They'd been trying to take our territory for years." "Then let's give them a fight they won't forget," Kale said, his eyes gleaming with determination. Together, Lyra and Kale joined the Zethar warriors as they rushed to meet the invading force. The battle was fierce and chaotic. The Kehera warriors, clad in heavy armor and wielding plasma rifles, advanced relentlessly, cutting down Zethar defenders with brutal efficiency. Lyra fought with the skill and ferocity of a cornered wolf, her arrows finding their marks with deadly accuracy. But the Kehera were too many, too well equipped. The Zethar were being pushed back. Kale moved like a whirlwind through the battlefield, his energy blade slicing through armor and flesh with ease. He fought with a cold precision that belied his weariness, his every move calculated to maximize damage and minimize risk. But even his skill was not enough to turn the tide of battle. The Kehera were gaining ground, and the Zethar were beginning to lose hope. Suddenly, Reinar appeared on the battlefield, his eyes fixed on Lyra. "Lyra," he shouted above the din of battle, "join me, and I will spare your people." Lyra glared at him, her hand tightening around her bow. "I will never join you, Reinar," she spat. "I would rather die than betray my tribe." Reinar's expression hardened. "Then you will die," he snarled. He raised his plasma rifle and aimed it at Lyra. But before he could fire, Kale stepped in front of her, deflecting the blast with his energy blade. "You'll have to go through me first," Kale growled. Reinar smirked. "So be it," he said. "I have been wanting to test my strength against you, outsider." Reiner gestured to his warriors, who formed a circle around him and Kale, leaving Lyra to stand alone outside the ring. "This is between us," Reiner said. "If you win, I will leave the Zethar in peace. But if I win, Lyra will become my mate, and your tribe will be mine." Kale stared at Reiner, his green eyes burning with defiance. He knew he was outmatched. Reiner was younger, stronger, and better equipped. But he couldn't back down now. Not with so much at stake. "Agreed," Kale said. "Let's finish this." The Zethar encampment was bathed in the eerie glow of the twin moons, the ongoing battle momentarily forgotten as all eyes focused on the circle where Kale and Reiner stood poised for their duel. The air crackled with tension, thick with the weight of tradition, rivalry, and the unspoken feelings that bound Lyra to both men. Kale circled Reiner, his energy blade humming softly, a stark contrast to Reiner's confident stance and the menacing gleam of his plasma rifle. Kale knew he was at a disadvantage. Reiner was strong, familiar with the terrain, and wielding a weapon far more potent than his own. But Kale had fought against worse odds. He had to rely on his instincts, his training, and the unexpected surge of protectiveness he felt toward Lyra and the Zethar. "You fight for a lost cause, outsider," Reiner sneered, breaking the silence. "The Zethar are weak. They cannot survive without my guidance." Kale didn't respond with words. He lunged, his blade a silver streak aimed at Reiner's weapon. Reiner sidestepped with surprising agility and fired a plasma blast, forcing Kale to dive for cover. The ground sizzled where the energy bolt struck, a stark reminder of the stakes. The duel became a dance of desperation and skill. Kale, agile and quick, dodged and weaved, trying to close the distance and negate Reiner's ranged advantage. Reiner, with his superior strength and firepower, kept Kale at bay, each blast a calculated strike meant to weaken and demoralize. Lyra watched, her heart pounding, torn between her loyalty to her tribe and the growing respect she felt for Kale. She knew Reiner's ambition, his ruthlessness. He would stop at nothing to achieve his goals, and the Zethar would be crushed beneath his heel. But Kale, the outsider, was fighting for them, for her, with a courage that defied logic. As the duel raged on, a tremor shook the ground. The twin moons began to shift in the sky, their ethereal glow intensifying, casting long, distorted shadows across the battlefield. The air grew thick with an energy Lyra had never felt before, an ancient power that resonated deep within her soul. "The convergence," Elder Tovin cried out, his voice filled with awe and fear. "It has begun." The convergence was a rare cosmic event, a celestial alignment that occurred only once every few centuries. It was said to unleash untold energies, capable of reshaping worlds and altering the course of destiny. Reiner, distracted by the commotion, faltered for a moment, giving Kale the opening he needed. He lunged forward, his blade aimed at the joint of Reiner's weapon arm. Reiner cried out as the blade severed a crucial power cable, rendering his plasma rifle useless. Now the fight was even. Kale pressed his advantage, his attacks relentless, forcing Reiner to retreat. But as he cornered Reiner near the edge of the encampment, the ground beneath them began to crack and crumble. A chasm opened up, revealing a swirling vortex of energy that pulsed with raw power. Reiner, desperate, grabbed Lyra and held her hostage, pressing the ruined plasma rifle against her head. "Step back, outsider," he roared, his voice hoarse with desperation. "Or she dies." Kale froze, his blade still humming, his mind racing. He couldn't risk Lyra's life, but he couldn't let Reiner escape. Lyra stared at Kale, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She knew what she had to do. "Don't listen to him, Kale," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Save our people." With a sudden surge of strength, Lyra twisted free from Reiner's grasp and kicked him toward the chasm. He stumbled backward, his eyes wide with terror, and plunged into the swirling vortex below. Kale watched, stunned, as Reiner disappeared into the abyss. He turned to Lyra, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. "Are you all right?" he asked. Lyra nodded, her gaze fixed on the chasm. The energies swirling within grew stronger, threatening to consume everything in their path. "We have to stop it," she said, her voice urgent. "The convergence is destabilizing the planet. If we don't do something, it will tear us all apart." Kale nodded, his mind already calculating. "What do we do?" Lyra looked at him, her eyes shining with newfound resolve. "We use the bond," she said, "the sacred connection between us. It's the only way to channel the energy and stabilize the planet." Kale hesitated. He didn't understand the intricacies of Zephyr traditions, but he trusted Lyra. He took her hand, feeling a surge of energy flow between them, a tangible connection that transcended language and culture. Together, they stood at the edge of the chasm, their hands clasped tightly, their hearts beating as one. They closed their eyes and focused on the energy that bound them, channeling it into the swirling vortex below. The ground trembled, the moons pulsed, and the air crackled with power. But as Lyra and Kale poured their combined energy into the chasm, the vortex began to stabilize, the destructive forces slowly subsiding. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the tremors ceased. The moons returned to their normal positions, and the air grew still once more. The convergence had passed, leaving behind a sense of awe and wonder. Lyra and Kale opened their eyes, their bodies weak but their spirits soaring. They had faced the impossible and emerged victorious, their bond forged in the fires of adversity. In the aftermath of the convergence, the Zephyr and Kara tribes, humbled by the near destruction of their world, forged a new alliance. They recognized that their survival depended on cooperation, not conflict. Kale, no longer an outsider, became a valued member of the Zephyr tribe, his knowledge and skills proving invaluable in their efforts to rebuild and strengthen their community. He learned to respect their traditions, and they learned to appreciate his unique perspective. And Lyra, she found love in the most unexpected place. The bond that had been forced upon them had become something real, something profound. They chose to honor the tradition, not out of obligation, but out of love. Under the twin moons, Lyra and Kale stood hand in hand, their eyes fixed on the stars. They had caught each other's arrows, not just in a moment of chance, but in a cosmic dance of destiny. And together, they would face whatever the future held, their bond forged in the stars, unbreakable and eternal.